The punch landed before the sound arrived. Not because it was fast, not because it was powerful, but because reality hesitated. For a fraction of a second, the world failed to decide how much damage was allowed, and in that indecision, something broke that was never meant to bend. A man stood at the center of it, bald, expression unreadable, his fist still extended as if he hadn't quite realized what he'd done. The air around him rippled, not violently, but nervously, like the surface of water after something impossibly heavy had passed through without sinking. There was no crater, no fireball, just silence stretching too long, the kind that makes even gods uncomfortable. This universe understood strength. It had cataloged it, measured it, feared it, monetized it. Power here came with rules, with limits written into the bones of reality itself. Even the strongest beings obeyed something: physics, magic, narrative, consequence. Power always left a scar, always demanded a price. This man did not. He did not glow. He did not posture. He did not announce himself as anything more than ordinary. Yet the laws that defined this world leaned away from him, subtly, instinctively, like animals sensing something they could not fight. Across the planet, minds sharpened with suspicion. Ancient watchers felt a pressure they had not felt since the universe was young. Heroes accustomed to being the ceiling of strength felt something colder than fear settle in their chests: irrelevance. The contradiction was not that an invincible man existed. The contradiction was that he did not seem to care. He wasn't here to conquer. He wasn't here to save. He wasn't even here to prove anything. He simply stood where he stood, bored eyes scanning a skyline built on struggle and sacrifice, as if asking a question no one had prepared for. What happens to a universe that defines itself by effort, when effort no longer matters? If you're still here, don't rush. This isn't a story meant to be consumed quickly or solved neatly. It's a slow descent into imbalance, into a world realizing that its greatest strength may no longer mean anything at all. Stay with the quiet moments, with the pauses where no one knows what to do next, with the discomfort of watching characters who have survived everything suddenly doubt the rules that kept them alive. Follow this path not because it promises answers, but because it refuses to give easy ones. Because once you've seen a world where limits fail, it becomes hard to return to believing in them the same way. What unfolds next isn't about who wins a fight. It's about who a universe becomes when its stories stop working. Remain here and listen closely, not to explosions or speeches, but to the silence after power reveals itself. Some stories change you not by what they show, but by what they take away. The city was already in motion when he arrived. Morning traffic snarled through narrow streets, horns blaring with the practiced impatience of people who believed this delay was the most important injustice of their day. Steam rose from grates in the sidewalk. Coffee spilled onto suit sleeves. Somewhere above it all, a helicopter traced a lazy circle, its presence so familiar no one bothered to look up anymore. Saitama stood in the middle of a crosswalk, plastic grocery bag dangling from one hand. The light was red. Cars screeched to a halt around him, drivers leaning out of windows to shout insults that died halfway through their throats, not because he looked dangerous, because something about him felt unfinished, like a sentence that refused to end properly. He blinked, glanced up at the signal, and took one step back onto the curb. "Oops," he muttered. The world continued. That was the first thing that went wrong. There was no flash of light announcing a dimensional breach, no tremor rippling through the pavement, no cosmic trumpet or ripple of magic. Whatever mechanism had brought him here had done so with a level of indifference that bordered on insulting. Reality hadn't fought him. It had simply made room. Saitama adjusted the grocery bag, frowning at a crushed carton of eggs inside. He sighed, the sound small and human against the city's roar. "Man," he said to no one, "I really need to be more careful." Several blocks away, deep beneath reinforced steel and humming servers, A monitor flickered. At first no one noticed. Glitches happened, data lagged, the universe was noisy even when nothing was wrong, but then another screen stuttered, and another. Patterns desynchronized, predictive models disagreed with themselves. A technician leaned closer, brow furrowing. "That's weird." "What is?" his supervisor asked without looking up. "The probability curve," the technician said. "It just flattened." The supervisor finally turned. "Flattened how?" The technician swallowed, like it hit a ceiling that shouldn't exist. They stared at the screen in silence, neither willing to say the obvious thing aloud. In this world, power always produced variance. Even gods spiked the data. There were signatures, costs, feedback. This reading showed none of that. Above ground, Saitama wandered into a convenience store, the bell over the door chiming softly. Fluorescent lights buzzed. A bored cashier glanced up, then did a double take. Saitama nodded politely. "Morning." The cashier hesitated, then nodded back. Morning." Saitama grabbed a can of juice from the fridge, squinting at the label. "Do you guys have the one with the little cartoon alien on it? It's usually on sale." The cashier stared. Something in her chest tightened. She couldn't explain why. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't strange. And yet, a quiet instinct told her she was standing too close to something that did not obey the rules she'd spent her life trusting. "End of aisle 3, she said finally, voice a little too quick. "Thanks." He walked away. The feeling lingered. High above the city, in the thin air where clouds smeared into pale streaks, Superman hovered motionless. He had been mid-patrol when it happened. Not a sound, not a shockwave, just a pressure, sudden and wrong like a misaligned note in a familiar song. His senses, tuned to disaster, to suffering, to imbalance, had all gone silent at once. Not quiet. Silent. He closed his eyes, listening harder. Heartbeats returned, traffic noise, the distant rumble of construction. Everything that should be there was there, except the thing that had brushed past him. Clark opened his eyes slowly, gaze sweeping the horizon. His jaw tightened. "That's not possible," he whispered. In the watchtower, alarms did not sound. That was the second thing that went wrong. Batman stood alone in the monitoring bay, cape draped over one shoulder, eyes scanning streams of data faster than any human should have been able to. He trusted silence less than noise. Silence meant something had decided not to announce itself. "Run the check again," he said into the calm. "I did," Oracle replied. "Twice, there's nothing." Batman's fingers curled slightly. "There's always something." On one screen, a city block displayed normal parameters, heat signatures, motion, no anomalies, no threats. Batman zoomed in anyway. He froze on a frame. A bald man stood on a sidewalk, holding a plastic bag, staring at a sale sign taped crookedly to a storefront window. Nothing about the image screamed danger. And yet, Batman felt it, the same wrongness Superman had felt in the sky. Not power. Absence. "Pull everything you can on him," Batman said quietly. Oracle hesitated. "Bruce, there's no digital footprint, no records, facial recognition can't place him." Batman didn't look away from the screen. "That's not reassuring." Back on the street, Saitama frowned at the price tag. "Huh," he said, "guess it's not on sale." He shrugged, grabbed it anyway, and headed for the counter. As he paid, the cashier's hand shook just enough for the change to spill onto the counter. She flushed, embarrassed. "Sorry," she said. Saitama smiled, awkward and apologetic. "No worries." Their fingers brushed as he picked up the coins. For half a second, the lights flickered. Not off, not on, just uncertain. Miles away, deep in places that did not exist on any map, ancient things stirred. Not because they sensed a threat, because something had entered their domain without triggering the alarms they themselves embodied. Balance had not been broken. It had been ignored. Saitama stepped back outside, sunlight warming his face. He squinted up at a sky that looked exactly like every other sky he'd ever seen, and felt a familiar, dull disappointment settle in his chest. So he said quietly, "Where am I now?" The city did not answer, but it had already begun to notice the question. The first response came from instinct, not strategy. Superman landed on the edge of a rooftop overlooking the street where the anomaly had last been recorded. The concrete cracked softly beneath his boots, not from force but from restraint. He stood still, listening. Wind pressed against his cape. Sirens wailed somewhere distant, ordinary and unconcerned. Nothing felt wrong anymore. That was what unsettled him. He closed his eyes again, extending his senses carefully, the way one might reach into dark water without splashing. Heartbeats lined up into a familiar rhythm. Voices overlapped. 1,000 lives moved forward without pause, and threaded through it all was a space where something should have registered but didn't, like a blind spot shaped exactly like a man. Clark exhaled slowly. "Batman," he said into the calm, keeping his voice low, "I think he's still here." "I know," Batman replied immediately, no hesitation. "I lost him 3 times already." Clark opened his eyes. "Lost him?" "He doesn't move like someone who's hiding," Batman said. "He just stops being relevant to the systems watching him. Cameras keep him until they don't. Patterns track him until they give up." "That shouldn't be possible." "No," Batman agreed, "it shouldn't." Several blocks away, Saitama sat on a park bench, Juicekin resting against his knee. Children ran past him chasing a ball, their laughter sharp and bright. A dog tugged on its leash, barking at pigeons that scattered in practiced arcs. The bench creaked under his weight as he leaned back and stared up at the sky. It looked normal. That was the problem. In every other place he'd been, even when things were quiet, there had been a feeling, a tension, a sense that something might happen if he stayed still long enough. Here, the world felt finished, like a story that had already decided where it was going and didn't need him to participate. He frowned. "Kind of depressing," he muttered. A woman sat down at the far end of the bench, phone pressed to her ear, voice tight. "I told you I can't," she said. "No, I can't keep covering for you. That's not my job anymore." She listened, jaw clenched, then closed her eyes. "I'm done," she said quietly and hung up. For a moment, she just sat there, breathing like she'd run a long distance without moving. Saitama glanced over. "Breakups are rough," he said, not unkindly. She startled. "Oh, sorry, I didn't see you there." He nodded. "Happens." She laughed once, humorless. "Guess so." They sat in silence. Wind rustled leaves overhead. Somewhere, a vendor shouted about roasted nuts. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. Saitama shrugged. "Sure." She hesitated, then looked straight ahead. "Do you ever feel like, no matter what you do, it won't actually change anything?" Saitama thought about it. About monsters that fell in one punch. About victories that never felt like victories. About the quiet boredom that followed every end. "Yeah," he said, "all the time." She nodded slowly, relieved by the honesty more than the answer. "That makes me feel less crazy." "Good," he said. She stood a moment later, brushing off her coat. "Thanks, whatever your name is." "Saitama." She smiled. "Thanks, Saitama." She walked away lighter than she'd arrived. Saitama watched her go, then stared at his juice. "Huh," he said, "that was new." In the watchtower, Wonder Woman felt it then. Not a threat, a weight shift, like a balance scale adjusting itself when a new object was placed carefully on one side. She turned from the viewport, expression sharpening. Something has entered our world that does not recognize strength the way we do. Batman's jaw tightened. "That's what worries me." "He hasn't attacked anyone," Flash said, arms crossed, restless. "Maybe he's just a guy." Batman looked at him. "You've seen the footage." Flash grimaced. Yeah, I know, still, he doesn't look dangerous. Neither does a black hole, Batman replied. Superman said nothing. He was watching the live feed Batman had pulled up, the bald man on a park bench, ordinary posture, no tension in his shoulders, no readiness. And yet Clark felt it now, faint but unmistakable. Pressure, not directed outward. Contained. I'm going to talk to him, Superman said. Batman turned, carefully. Superman nodded and stepped back from the watchtower's edge. The air rushed up to meet him as he descended, cape snapping once before settling. He slowed as he approached the park, deliberately visible, deliberately unthreatening. Children pointed. A few people stopped to stare. Saitama looked up, shading his eyes. Oh, he said, hey. Superman landed several yards away, boots touching grass without a sound. He smiled, the familiar expression that had calmed crowds and ended wars. Hi, he said, I know, Saitama replied. You're that guy from the posters. Superman blinked. Yes. They stood there, two figures that represented entirely different ideas of power, separated by a few feet of grass and a silence that stretched. I'm Superman, Clark said anyway. Saitama. Another pause. Are you lost? Superman asked. Saitama considered the question. Probably, he said. I don't remember coming here. Superman nodded slowly. This world can be overwhelming if you need help. Saitama tilted his head. Do you get bored? The question cut sideways, unexpected. Superman hesitated. I what? Bored, Saitama repeated. Like when you know how every fight ends before it starts. Clark felt something twist in his chest. He'd never put it in those words, never allowed himself to. I don't fight for excitement, he said carefully. Saitama shrugged. Yeah, me neither, didn't help. The air between them thickened, not with hostility but with implication. Superman felt it then fully, not strength, not menace, but certainty, absolute, effortless certainty, the kind that didn't need to prove itself. Clark took a small step back without realizing it. Batman's voice crackled in his ear. Clark. I know, Superman said quietly. Saitama stood up, stretching his arms. Anyway, nice meeting you, he said. If you know where the cheap apartments are around here, that'd be great. Superman stared at him. The universe waited. And for the first time, Superman realized that whatever this man was, the problem wasn't that he could end any fight. It was that he didn't need one to change everything. The city adjusted around him in small, almost embarrassed ways. Saitama noticed it first when his apartment search turned out to be strangely easy. Listings that had been marked unavailable refreshed themselves when he tapped them. A landlord who'd sounded annoyed over the phone softened halfway through the conversation, as if he'd forgotten why he was irritated in the first place. No favors were offered. No rules were broken. It was subtler than that. Resistance simply failed to appear. He didn't think much of it. The apartment was small, barely furnished, the kind of place that smelled like paint and old dust in someone else's abandoned plans. It suited him. He dropped his bag by the door, sat on the floor, and stared at the wall for a while. This world's quieter, he said to no one, too quiet. Outside, the Justice League argued without raising their voices. Bruce stood at the center of the watchtower's command room, hands braced against the table, eyes fixed on a rotating hologram of the city. Points of light marked probability clusters, predictive models recalculating faster than most human minds could follow. They kept failing. He doesn't trigger escalation, Batman said. He diffuses it. Every projection where he stays uninvolved collapses into normality. That sounds like a good thing, Flash said, packing. Isn't that the goal? No, Batman replied. The goal is stability. This is erosion. Wonder Woman crossed her arms. Explain. Batman brought up footage. protests dissolving without confrontation, criminal operations abandoned mid-planning, a metahuman standoff that ended with everyone simply leaving. Conflict doesn't resolve, Batman continued. It loses momentum, like a story that forgets why it started. Superman watched silently. He hadn't stopped thinking about the park, about the question he hadn't answered. Do you get bored? He's not intervening, Clark said finally. He's existing. That's worse, Batman said. Power that doesn't assert itself can't be predicted by opposition. Across the city, Lex Luthor watched the same footage alone, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. Unlike Batman, Lex wasn't unsettled by uncertainty. He was offended by it. A man without ambition, he murmured. That's not a mystery, that's a threat. He rewound the clip of Saitama leaving the park. No aura, no tells, no visible effort, just a man walking away while Superman stood still behind him. Lex smiled thinly. Every system has a ceiling, he said. Let's find his. Saitama discovered the grocery store next. The prices were higher than he liked. The aisles were longer, the labels unfamiliar. He wandered for nearly an hour, comparing brands with exaggerated seriousness. A woman reached for the same discounted noodles at the same time he did. Oh, sorry, she said quickly, pulling her hand back. Saitama shook his head. You can have them. No, really. It's fine, he said. I'll just get something else. She hesitated, then smiled, relief flickering across her face. Thanks. She walked away, then paused, turning back. You know, she said, it's weird. I've been stressed all day, and for some reason that just helped. Saitama blinked. Noodles. She laughed. No, you. She left before he could respond. He stood there holding a different pack of noodles, brow furrowed. I'm not doing anything, he muttered. But somewhere deep in the structure of this universe, the equation disagreed. By the third day, the news cycle had noticed the absence. Not of disasters, of reactions. Commentators struggled to frame it. Crime rates dipped without explanation. Viral outrage stalled before peaking. Even political theater lost some of its sharpness, debates ending in awkward pauses where talking points used to land cleanly. It's like people are tired, one anchor said, forcing a smile. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Behind the scenes, every major institution felt the pressure. Not the kind that broke walls or bent laws. The kind that made people hesitate before pulling levers they'd relied on for decades. Lex Luthor did not hesitate. The facility was buried beneath layers of plausible deniability, shielded from satellites, protected against everything the world understood as force. He stood behind reinforced glass, watching Saitama through a one-way field. Saitama stood in the center of the room, hands in his pockets, looking around with mild interest. This feels like a test, he said. Lex's voice came through speakers, calm and confident. Observation, he corrected. You're an anomaly. Saitama shrugged. Happens. Lex's smile tightened. You don't appear concerned. Should I be? You're in a room designed to withstand gods. Saitama looked down at the floor, tapped it once with his foot. It didn't crack. He nodded approvingly. Nice floor. Lex leaned forward. You don't understand what you are. Saitama met the glass with an unblinking stare. Neither do you. The instruments spiked. Not violently, not dramatically. They simply failed to register anything useful. Lex straightened slowly. You think this is a joke, he said. No, Saitama replied. I think you want it to be one. Lex's eyes narrowed. Everyone wants something. Saitama considered that. Yeah, he said, that's kind of the problem. For the first time in years, Lex felt something like uncertainty creep in. Not fear, doubt. The kind that didn't come from not knowing but from realizing knowledge might not matter. He cut the feed. In the watchtower, alarms chimed softly, not alerts, warnings. He's been taken, Batman said. Superman was already moving. He arrived too late. The facility lay open, doors unlocked, guards unconscious but unharmed. No sign of struggle, no breach. Saitama sat on the steps outside, eating noodles from a paper cup. "Oh," he said when he saw Superman, "hey again." Clark stared at him. "Did Luthor hurt you?" Saitama shook his head. "Nah, he talked a lot, got bored." Superman glanced back at the facility, then at Saitama. "You walked out." "Yeah, the door wasn't locked." Clark's jaw tightened. "It was." Saitama frowned. Weird." They stood there, the sky darkening overhead, the city holding its breath. "You don't see it, do you?" Superman said quietly. "See what?" "What you're doing," Clark said, "to this world." Saitama looked around, at the streetlights flickering on, at people walking home, at a normal evening unfolding without spectacle. "It seems fine," he said honestly. "That's what scares me," Superman replied. Saitama met his gaze. For the first time something flickered there, not guilt, not pride. Loneliness. "In my world," he said slowly, "things only changed when someone got hurt." He looked back at the city. Maybe this one's different. The wind picked up, carrying with it a pressure that hadn't been there before. Far above, something unseen shifted its attention. Superman felt it immediately. A consequence forming. The pressure didn't feel like an attack. That was what unsettled Superman most as he followed Saitama through the city. It wasn't heat. It wasn't gravity. It wasn't anything that could be pointed to and named. It was the sense that something enormous had leaned closer, not aggressively, not even curiously, but with intent sharpened just enough to matter. Saitama felt it too. He stopped at a crosswalk, the red hand blinking patiently, traffic humming past in neat, obedient lines. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to a sound only he could hear. "Is this another test?" he asked. Superman hovered a few feet above the pavement, cape stirring in the night air. "No," he said, "this is reaction." "To me." "To the absence you create," Clark replied. The light changed. They crossed together. No one screamed. No one stared. A pair of teenagers laughed nearby, unaware they were sharing a sidewalk with something that made the universe hesitate. Behind them, on rooftops and in shadows, systems began to mobilize. Batman watched the feeds in silence, jaw tight. Every predictive model now showed the same curve. Not escalation, not collapse flattening. A long, slow erosion of tension that his world had been built to withstand, not lose. "This isn't peace," he said quietly. "It's entropy." Wonder Woman turned from the window. "Or balance." Batman shook his head. "Balance requires effort. This is effortless." That word echoed in Saitama's mind as they walked. Effortless. He hadn't trained for this world. He hadn't earned its quiet. He hadn't fought for its fragile calm. And yet, wherever he went, conflict softened, edges rounding off as if reality itself had decided resistance was inefficient. "You think I'm breaking something," Saitama said. Superman didn't answer immediately. They stopped beneath a bridge where city noise collapsed into a low, steady echo. Clark finally landed, boots touching concrete with care. "I think you're asking a question no one here knows how to answer," he said. "What happens when power stops caring whether it's needed?" Saitama frowned. "I care." Clark met his eyes. "Do you?" The question landed harder than any punch ever had. Saitama looked away, hands curling loosely at his sides. "In my world," he said, "caring was exhausting. Every fight just led to another, stronger, louder. I kept winning and nothing changed." "So you stopped trying," Superman said gently. "I stopped expecting it to matter," Saitama corrected. The air tightened again. Far away, Lex Luthor stood before a chamber of humming machinery, jaw clenched as data scrolled past unreadable thresholds. He didn't need the numbers to tell him what he felt. The world was slipping out of narrative control. "Activate Phase 2, he said. "No weapons," an aide asked hesitantly. Lex smiled thinly. "Definitions," he replied. "Let's remind reality what it's allowed to be." Above the city, satellites realigned, not targeting Saitama but the space around him. Parameters tightened, probability narrowed. The universe leaned back, trying to remember its rules. Saitama winced. "That's annoying," he said. Superman felt it too now, a drag like flying through syrup. "They're constraining possibility," he said. "They're afraid of what you represent." Saitama closed his eyes. For a moment, the city went very still. Not frozen, listening. "I didn't come here to change anything," he said quietly. "I just wanted somewhere quiet." The pressure spiked. Buildings creaked, lights flickered, people stumbled, clutching at nothing, hearts racing without cause. Batman's alarms finally screamed. "That's it," Batman said. "The system's pushing back." Superman turned sharply. "Saitama, don't." Too late. Saitama stepped forward, not striking, not resisting, but refusing to yield. The constraints shattered like mist. Satellites lost alignment. Probability rebounded violently. The backlash rippled outward. Not destruction, disruption. Subs across the city faltered, powers misfiring just long enough to feel doubt. Institutions stuttered. Control slipped. Saitama staggered, breathing hard. "That wasn't supposed to happen," he said. Superman caught him instinctively, steadying him. "You can't exist here without consequence," he said urgently. "This world needs struggle. It defines itself by it." Saitama looked up, eyes wide, not with fear but realization. "So if I stay," he said slowly, "I erase something important." Above them, the unseen presence shifted again, no longer observing, now deciding. Superman felt it like a verdict approaching. And Saitama finally understood what this world was asking of him. Not to fight, but to choose. The choice did not arrive with clarity. It arrived with weight. Saitama stood on the rooftop long after Superman had gone, the city spread out beneath him in grids of light and shadow that pulsed like something alive. The wind tugged at his cape with the same indifference it always had. Below, life continued. Cars moved. Windows glowed. Somewhere, someone laughed too loudly, and somewhere else, someone cried where no one could hear them. The world was still working. That was the problem. He could feel it now unmistakably, the way his presence pressed against the shape of things. Not violently, not even actively, just by existing. Like a mass placed on a delicate surface, warping it without intention. In his own world, power had been a blunt instrument. You hit the monster fell, cities rebuilt, people cheered, then forgot. The cycle was loud and pointless, but it was honest about its brutality. This universe was quieter, sharper. It hid its violence in systems and smiles, in contracts and narratives that told people everything was under control while quietly deciding who mattered. And now those systems were reacting to him. Not because he challenged them, because he made them unnecessary. Down below, in a narrow alley that smelled like rain and old oil, a mugging stopped mid-motion. The man holding the knife froze, heart hammering, suddenly aware of how stupidly small his reasons felt. He lowered the blade without understanding why, muttered an apology that tasted like ash, and ran. The woman stood shaking, unharmed, staring after him in disbelief. Saitama felt it like a tug behind his eyes. "Sorry," he whispered, though he didn't know to whom. In the watchtower, Batman watched dozens of moments like that stack up on his screens. Not miracles, not interventions, failures of intent. "This can't continue," he said, voice tight. "He's not solving crime, he's short-circuiting motive." Wonder Woman folded her arms, or revealing it. Batman turned. "You think that makes it better?" "I think it makes it dangerous," she replied calmly, "to us." Clark stood apart from them, gaze distant. He could still feel the echo of the pressure that had built around Saitama earlier, the way reality itself had seemed to tense, like a muscle pulled too far. "He doesn't want this," Clark said. "He's not choosing it." "That doesn't matter," Batman snapped. "Intent doesn't negate outcome." Clark didn't argue. He didn't know how to. Far beneath the watchtower, Lex Luthor prepared for escalation with the patience of someone who had always believed the world needed him to survive. The second phase had failed to contain the anomaly. That was acceptable. Failure refined strategy. "This isn't about overpowering him," Lex said to the empty room. "It's about reframing him." He gestured and a new projection lit the chamber, a media model, a narrative lattice. "If the universe is destabilizing because of what he represents," Lex continued, "then we make that representation visible, specific, limited. A god could be feared. A man could be blamed." High above the city, a drone passed silently, lenses adjusting, algorithms parsing. It captured Saitama standing alone on a rooftop, staring at nothing in particular. The footage was clean, ordinary, almost sad. Lex smiled. "Let's give him a story." Saitama sensed the shift before the broadcast began. The air grew directional, attention narrowing. The city's gaze focusing, not in wonder, but curiosity sharpened into suspicion. He turned on a street corner just as a screen flickered to life above him. His own face stared back, paused mid-expression, bald head gleaming under artificial light. A chyron scrolled beneath it, words carefully chosen. "Unidentified meta-human linked to recent anomaly." A passerby stopped beside him, squinting up at the screen. "Huh," the man said. "Looks like you." Saitama glanced up, then back at the man. "Yeah." The man laughed nervously. "Weird." He walked on. The damage was already done. By evening, the city buzzed with speculation. Commentators debated. Experts hypothesized. Fear crept back in, not loud but eager. The absence of conflict had unsettled people more than violence ever had. Now they had something to hold on to, a shape to blame. Saitama walked through it all, shoulders slumped, hands in his pockets. "This is what they need," he murmured, "an enemy." Superman found him again at dusk, hovering low so as not to draw attention. "They're turning you into a story," Clark said. Saitama didn't look up. "They always do." "This one's different," Clark replied. "Stories here don't end, they metastasize." Saitama stopped walking. For the first time since arriving, he looked tired. "If I leave," he asked quietly, "does it go back?" Clark hesitated. "Eventually, maybe." "And if I stay?" Clark didn't answer. The silence did. Above them, unseen, the greater presence shifted once more, not curious now, but alert. The universe had broadcast instability, and something older than heroism had noticed. Saitama felt it settle like a shadow behind the world. Not judgment. Expectation. He exhaled slowly. "Guess I can't just ignore this," he said. The city lights flickered as if in agreement. And somewhere deep within the machinery of control, a final option unlocked, one that did not care whether Saitama was a man or a god. Only whether he belonged. The city did not turn on him all at once. It never does. Suspicion crept in sideways, wearing the mask of concern. People glanced twice instead of once. Conversations stalled when he passed. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered something that made the woman pull the child closer without looking at him. Saitama felt each moment like a faint tap against his chest, not painful, just cumulative. This was different from monsters. Monsters were honest. They screamed. They charged. They broke things loudly enough that everyone knew where they stood. This was quieter. This was the world deciding how much space he was allowed to occupy. He stood at a bus stop as a screen across the street replayed footage of him walking through the city, slowed down, annotated, framed. Analysts talked over his image, voices calm and authoritative, describing probability distortions and behavioral dampening effects. He reduces escalation, one said, which sounds positive until you realize conflict is how societies correct imbalance. Saitama frowned. Is it? He muttered. The bus arrived late. No one sat next to him. In the watchtower, Batman watched the public shift with grim inevitability. This was always the outcome, he said. You remove the visible threat, people invent one. Wonder Woman looked troubled, and if they're wrong? Batman didn't look away from the screen. Then they'll double down, they always do. Superman stood apart again, hands clenched loosely at his sides. He could hear the city's pulse from here, the rise in heart rates, the spike in agitation. Not panic, readiness. They're preparing, Clark said, not to fight him, to justify fighting him. That distinction chilled even Diana. Below, Lex Luthor watched approval metrics tick upward. Fear, when framed properly, was a reliable accelerant. Perfect, he murmured. Now he's comprehensible. Saitama felt the trap before he saw it. The street emptied too quickly. Doors closed with unnatural synchronicity. The hum of the city dimmed, like someone lowering the volume before an announcement. He stopped walking. All right, he said to the empty street. This feels like the part where someone explains something. The explanation arrived as pressure. Not the cosmic presence from before, this was human, technological, layers of constraint settling into place, tightening the margins of what was allowed to happen here. Invisible lines snapped into alignment around him, reality reinforced not by force but by insistence. Containment fields. Definitions. Limits. Saitama blinked. High above, Lex watched telemetry stabilize for the first time since Saitama's arrival. The anomaly wasn't gone, but it was boxed, measured, contextualized. We're not suppressing him, Lex said calmly to the assembled observers. We're isolating influence. On the street, Saitama took a step forward. The air resisted. Not like a wall, like expectation. He leaned into it, brow furrowing slightly. The resistance increased, proportional and careful. Smart. So this is how you do it, he said. You don't stop the punch, you stop the idea of throwing it. The pressure climbed. Around the perimeter, civilians watched from behind barriers, phones raised despite instructions not to record. Whispers rippled. Is that him? He doesn't look scary. Why isn't he doing anything? Saitama felt it then, the choice sharpening into something unavoidable. If he pushed back, even gently, the city would feel it. Buildings wouldn't fall, but belief would. The fragile narrative holding this place together would tear, and people would get hurt in ways no punch could fix. If he did, he would be defined, reduced, turned into something manageable. Superman arrived in a blur of red and blue, landing just outside the field. His eyes met Saitama through layers of unseen constraint. Don't, Clark said quietly. If you break this, they'll escalate. They won't stop. Saitama smiled faintly. They already have. Clark swallowed. Then let me help. Saitama shook his head. That's the problem, he said. If you help, it proves their point. The pressure tightened again. Somewhere, a system recalibrated, pushing closer to a threshold it had never tested. Lex leaned forward. Hold, he commanded. Let's see what he does. For the first time since arriving in this universe, Saitama felt something close to anger. Not at the people watching, not at the man pulling strings, but at himself. Because he understood now. This world didn't need another unbeatable hero. It needed permission to struggle. And he had taken that away just by being here. Saitama exhaled slowly and did something no one expected. He sat down. right there on the asphalt, cross-legged, hands resting on his knees. The containment field adjusted in confusion. The metrics spiked, then dipped, unable to classify the action. "I'm not fighting you," Saitama said, voice carrying easily despite the barriers. "And I'm not saving you either." People murmured. Lex frowned. Superman felt the universe lean forward, uncertain. "I'll stay," Saitama continued, "but I won't fix things. I won't stop criminals before they choose to stop. I won't make it easy." The pressure wavered. "You want struggle," he said. "Then struggle, without pretending someone stronger will clean it up." Silence spread, heavy and unstable. The containment field didn't collapse. It hesitated. Above them all, the greater presence shifted again, not approving, not condemning. Recalculating. Because Saitama had made a choice no system was built to account for. And the cost of that choice had yet to arrive. The city didn't know what to do with him anymore. That was the most dangerous thing of all. Saitama's decision to stay, to refuse both heroism and destruction, didn't resolve the tension. It redistributed it. Like water forced into new cracks, pressure migrated into places no one had been watching. The containment field remained in place for hours after he sat down, not because it was necessary, but because no one dared be the first to turn it off. Eventually, it powered down quietly. No announcement, no apology. Saitama stood, dusted off his pants, and walked away while cameras hesitated, unsure whether they were allowed to follow. He returned to his small apartment and lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, listening to the building creak as if it were thinking. "I didn't win," he muttered, "didn't lose either." Outside, the consequences began. Crime didn't spike. That was what everyone expected. Instead, it became erratic. Some nights were quiet to the point of discomfort. Other nights erupted in sudden, localized violence, arguments turning physical, small groups clashing without clear reasons. Without the assumption that heroes would arrive, people hesitated longer before acting, and then sometimes acted worse. Superman felt it first. He stopped a robbery that should have been simple. The man with the gun was shaking, eyes wild, desperation boiling over. When Clark disarmed him gently, the man screamed, not in fear but rage. "You're late," he shouted. "You're all late." Clark froze, the words hitting harder than the situation demanded. Afterward, as police led the man away, Clark stood alone in the alley, cape fluttering uselessly. He hadn't been late. But the world felt like he had. In the watchtower, Batman tracked the pattern with growing unease. "They're adapting," he said, "not to Saitama, to his absence." Wonder Woman looked at the data. "This was always the risk," she said softly. "When gods step back, mortals don't become wiser overnight." Batman didn't respond. His models were doing something new. Instead of projecting outcomes, they were looping, feedback spirals where every intervention created equal and opposite dependence. "This isn't sustainable," he said finally. "Either people learn responsibility or they invent a new idol." As if summoned by the thought, Lex Luthor stepped into the spotlight. He didn't attack Saitama. He didn't imprison him again. He did something far more effective. He offered answers. A broadcast went live across major networks, framed as a discussion, not a declaration. Lex sat comfortably, hands folded, voice calm. "We've all felt it," he said. "The uncertainty, the hesitation, the sense that the rules have changed without our consent." Behind him, carefully curated footage played, moments of stalled conflict, of Saitama standing still while the world recalibrated around him. "This individual is not a villain," Lex continued. "But he is not a hero either. He is a destabilizer, a reminder of how fragile our systems are when we stop believing in them." The message landed exactly where it was meant to. People didn't hate Saitama. They feared what his existence implied. In his apartment, Saitama watched the broadcast on a flickering screen, chewing on a piece of toast. "That guy talks too much," he said. But he didn't turn it off. Outside, protests formed, not against Saitama directly but against uncertainty. Signs demanded structure, safety, accountability. The streets filled with voices asking to be told what to do again. And Lex listened. He convened private meetings, military leaders, corporate interests, metahuman oversight committees that had been waiting years for a justification this clean. "We don't need to remove him," Lex told them. "We need to contextualize him permanently." "How?" someone asked. Lex smiled, "By making him irrelevant." The plan unfolded quietly. Funding shifted. Hero deployment protocols changed. Superman noticed it when he arrived at a crisis site already managed, authorities insisting they had things under control, even as chaos brewed beneath the surface. "You don't need me," an official told him too quickly. Clark flew away with a knot in his chest. That night, Saitama stood on his balcony, listening to the city argue with itself. He felt the greater presence again, not pressing this time but watching from a respectful distance. "You're still there," he said softly. The presence did not answer. But the silence felt conditional. Because Saitama's refusal had created a vacuum. And vacuums never stayed empty for long. The vacuum filled faster than anyone expected. It didn't come as a coup or a war. It arrived dressed as efficiency, as coordination, as relief. Lex Luthor's framework spread through the city in the form of pilot programs and emergency charters, each one justified by the same quiet refrain. Heroes were unreliable, gods were inconsistent, and uncertainty was too expensive to tolerate. New response units appeared, non-powered, heavily equipped, trained to contain rather than confront. Algorithms determined threat levels before a human voice ever weighed in. The language was careful: stabilization, assurance, continuity. People welcomed it. After weeks of tension, of not knowing whether silence meant safety or the calm before something worse, structure felt like mercy. Lines returned, timetables, protocols, the illusion that someone had their hands on the wheel again. Saitama watched it happen from ground level. He stood in line at a coffee shop where armed security now lingered by the door, scanning faces with polite suspicion. A woman ahead of him fumbled for change, hands shaking. When she dropped a coin, the guard's posture shifted instantly, alertness snapping into place. The woman froze, breath hitching, fear flaring too quickly to be reasonable. "It's okay," Saitama said, bending to pick up the coin. He handed it back to her with an easy smile. She took it but didn't relax. She nodded stiffly and hurried away, eyes darting back toward the guard. Saitama straightened slowly. "Yeah," he murmured, "this is worse." Across the city, Superman hovered above a construction site where a new response tower rose with unnerving speed. He could hear the workers' heartbeats, steady but tense, like people building something they didn't quite believe in but were grateful to have. Batman joined him silently. "They're outsourcing trust," Bruce said, "replacing hope with procedure." Clark didn't look away from the city, and people prefer that. "Because procedure doesn't disappoint," Bruce replied. "It doesn't hesitate." Clark clenched his fists. "Neither does tyranny." Bruce's jaw tightened. "Not until it does." Deep beneath the city, Lex watched approval ratings climb. The data was clean, predictable, comforting. "Fear wants an answer," he said to the empty room. "I gave them one." A subordinate hesitated nearby, and Saitama. Lex's smile didn't reach his eyes. "He's already obsolete, he just doesn't know it yet." That night the pressure returned. Not sharp, not sudden. Heavy. Saitama felt it while lying on the floor of his apartment, staring at a crack in the ceiling that vaguely resembled a monster he'd punched once, a long time ago. The air thickened, like the world leaning closer to listen. "You're not subtle," he said quietly. This time the presence answered. Not with words, with perspective. For a heartbeat, Saitama felt the city the way it felt itself, not as streets and people, but as systems stacked on top of systems, narratives reinforcing structures, fear feeding order feeding fear. He saw how quickly his arrival had destabilized things, and how efficiently control had rushed in to seal the breach. He also saw the endpoint. Not apocalypse. Stagnation. A world that no longer risked collapse, because it no longer risked change. Saitama sat up slowly, breath shallow. Oh, he said, that's bad. The presence did not correct him. Because it wasn't judging. It was waiting. The next morning, Lex Luthor held a press conference. Not about Saitama. About Superman. Extraordinary individuals, Lex said smoothly, cannot be allowed to operate without oversight. We've seen the cost of unregulated power, confusion, hesitation, destabilization. Clark watched the broadcast in silence from the watchtower, fists clenched so tightly the metal beneath them creaked. They're using him, Diana said quietly. No, Bruce replied, they're replacing him. Outside the city, in a place where noise thinned and the sky felt farther away, Saitama stood on an empty road and made his decision. Not in anger. Not in defiance. In clarity. I stayed because I didn't want to matter, he said to the empty horizon. Turns out that was the problem. The presence pressed closer, attentive. Saitama took a breath. If I leave, he said, they win. The presence did not disagree. If I stay like this, he continued, they rot. Silence stretched. Saitama smiled faintly, a tired, honest smile. Guess there's a third option. Far away, alarms flickered, not loud enough to trigger response, but just enough to register. Batman felt it first, a shift in probability he couldn't chart. What did he do? Clark asked. Bruce stared at his screen, pulse spiking. He didn't act, he said slowly. He committed. Above them all, the unseen presence recalculated. Because Saitama had just chosen to re-enter the story. Not as a savior. Not as a weapon. But as a disruption that would no longer allow itself to be ignored. And consequences, long delayed, were finally on their way. The first sign that something had changed was not violence. It was coordination failing. Across the city, response units arrived seconds too late to incidents that should have been predictable. Patrols crossed paths without acknowledgement, each following protocols that no longer aligned. Command centers flooded with contradictory data, algorithms tripping over edge cases they had never been built to resolve. Nothing catastrophic happened. Nothing dramatic. But the seams showed. Saitama walked openly now. No disguises, no avoidance. He moved through streets where cameras followed him automatically, lenses adjusting, systems tagging his presence without quite knowing what to do with it. He didn't interfere. He didn't provoke. He simply existed with intent, and that made all the difference. People noticed. Not with fear this time, but with confusion sharpened by curiosity. A man shouted at him from across a street, demanding to know what he was supposed to represent. Saitama stopped, thought about it, then shook his head. I'm not here to represent anything, he said. I'm here because pretending I don't matter turned out to matter. The man didn't know how to respond. Neither did the crowd that had begun to gather. Superman felt it like a pressure release. He arrived quietly, landing beside Saitama without spectacle. No speeches, no declarations, just presence. You're doing it again, Clark said. Saitama nodded. Yeah, but different. Clark studied him. You're not fixing things. No, Saitama agreed. I'm standing where the fix would usually go. That unsettled Clark more than any battle ever had. In the watchtower, Batman's screens filled with red, not alerts, but conflicts. systems contradicting themselves, oversight bodies issuing mutually exclusive directives. Lex's clean architecture was fracturing under the weight of real-world unpredictability. "He's forcing human choice back into the loop," Bruce said quietly. "The systems can't compensate." Diana watched footage of a standoff dissolving, not because someone intervened, but because no authority arrived quickly enough to tell people how to feel. The crowd dispersed awkwardly, arguments unfinished, decisions unresolved. "That's dangerous," she said. Bruce nodded. "So is certainty." Deep underground, Lex Luthor stared at cascading failures with disbelief bordering on fury. "He's not attacking," Lex snapped. "He's contaminating." "Sir," an aide said carefully, "public confidence is dropping. People are questioning the frameworks." Lex's eyes hardened. "Then we escalate definition," he said. "If he insists on being present, we make his presence unbearable." Orders moved. Restrictions tightened, movement corridors closed, surveillance intensified, subtle pressure applied to anyone seen interacting with Saitama. Employers received warnings, permits were delayed, lives became inconvenient. Saitama felt it immediately. Not as pain, as resistance. A woman who'd smiled at him days earlier now crossed the street to avoid him. A shop owner refused service without meeting his eyes. Not hostility, compliance. "They're afraid of losing permission," he said quietly. Superman clenched his jaw. "This is how it starts." "No," Saitama replied. "This is how it ends if no one notices." The presence stirred again, not above, not outside, but closer now, woven through probability like a current waiting for release. It wasn't interested in order or chaos. It was interested in outcomes. Saitama looked up at the sky, squinting slightly. "You see it too, don't you?" he said. "They're choosing stagnation." The presence did not answer, because it was no longer neutral. In the distance, sirens rose, not for a crime but for a gathering. People assembling without permits, without slogans, without leadership. Just voices overlapping, unsure, untrained, real. Batman's head snapped up. That wasn't planned. Clark felt a chill. They're acting without direction. Saitama exhaled slowly. "That's the risk," he said, "and the point." As the crowd swelled and systems scrambled to respond, Lex Luthor stared at a single projection. Saitama standing calmly at the center of a growing unknown. For the first time, Lex felt something slip beyond leverage. Not fear. Irreversibility. And above them all, the presence leaned in, no longer observing a variable, but preparing to record a verdict. The gathering did not look like a revolution. There were no banners, no chants practiced enough to sound unified. People stood in loose clusters, some talking, some silent, some clearly unsure why they had come at all. Phones were raised and lowered, live streams starting and stopping as if even the act of recording felt uncertain. It was messy, incomplete, human. That was what frightened the systems watching it. Response units circled the perimeter without advancing. Commands conflicted. Jurisdictions overlapped. Every protocol demanded authorization from another protocol that had not yet resolved. For the first time since Lex's framework had taken hold, the machinery hesitated long enough for choice to slip through the cracks. Saitama stood near the center of it, hands in his pockets, not elevated, not hidden, just there. A man near the front spoke first, voice unsteady. Are you supposed to tell us what to do?" Saitama looked at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "No." A woman laughed nervously. "Then why are you here?" Saitama considered that too. The question wasn't hostile, it was tired. "Because someone has to stand where answers usually pretend to be," he said, "and not give one." Murmurs rippled outward. Confusion, relief, frustration, all of it real. Superman hovered at the edge of the crowd, deliberately not taking center space. For once, he didn't feel like the axis everything turned on. That unsettled him. It also felt right. They're choosing, he realized aloud. Batman watched from the watchtower, breath shallow. His models had broken entirely now. No projections, no outcomes, just branching possibility. This is what we've been preventing, he said quietly. Wonder Woman nodded, and what we've been claiming to protect. Deep underground, Lex Luthor slammed his fist against the console hard enough to crack glass. Shut it down, he barked. Disperse them now. They're not violating any law, an aide replied, pale. Not yet. Lex froze. That was the problem. On the street, the pressure built, not from fear, not from force, but from significance. The presence that had watched from beyond probability now settled fully into the moment, no longer distant, no longer curious. Evaluating. Not Saitama. Everyone. Saitama felt it wrap around the crowd like a held breath. He straightened, shoulders relaxing instead of tensing. This is it, he murmured. Superman felt the air change, heavy and deliberate. What is? Saitama looked at him. For the first time, his smile wasn't bored or tired. It was gentle. Judgment, he said, not of power, of choice. The presence pressed closer, collapsing futures that relied on avoidance, on deferral, on the quiet assumption that someone else would fix it. The crowd felt it too, people stiffening, hearts racing, the sudden awareness that whatever happened next would belong to them. A response unit commander lowered his weapon. A woman in the crowd stepped forward and spoke again, louder this time. We don't know what we're doing. Saitama nodded. Yeah, he said, that's the point. The pressure peaked. And then it released. Not violently, not triumphantly. The presence withdrew, not because it was satisfied, but because the outcome no longer required intervention. The universe did not reward them. It did not punish them. It accepted the choice. Across the city, systems recalibrated without guidance. Some collapsed, some adapted, some held on desperately. There was no clean ending, no final verdict that could be packaged or sold. Just consequence. The crowd slowly dispersed, not in fear, but in uncertainty that felt earned. Conversations continued as people walked away, arguments unresolved, questions unanswered. Saitama stood alone again. Superman landed beside him, expression unreadable. Is it over? Saitama shrugged. For me, yeah. Clark's chest tightened. You're leaving. I have to, Saitama said. This world doesn't need someone who removes its weight. It needs to feel it. Batman's voice crackled over the comms, quiet and uncharacteristically human. If you go, the systems will try to rebuild. Saitama smiled faintly. I know. And they might succeed, Batman added. Saitama looked up at the sky one last time. That's on them. The air shimmered, not with light or sound, but with release. The pull returned, gentle but insistent, drawing him away from a story that no longer needed him as a catalyst. Before he vanished, Saitama spoke once more, not to the heroes, not to the crowd, but to the world itself. Strength isn't what fixes things, he said. Living with the consequences is. And then he was gone. No crater, no echo. Just absence. In the days that followed, the world stumbled forward. Some structures hardened, others cracked. People argued more, chose more, failed more honestly. Heroes hesitated, and sometimes that hesitation saved lives. Lex Luthor survived, of course. Power always did, but something about it felt thinner now, more visible. Superman flew less often and listened more. Batman stopped trying to solve every outcome. Wonder Woman watched humanity with renewed caution and respect. And somewhere beyond this universe's edge, Saitama drifted onward, not triumphant, not defeated. Just certain. Because the most dangerous thing he had ever done wasn't throwing a punch. It was leaving a world to decide what it would become without one. And that choice, once made, could never be taken back.